The Chicago Bears have some valuable stability on their special teams unit, but at the same time, some real jobs are up for grabs at training camp.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On the show today, we begin our Bears training camp previews, not with the quarterback position like everybody else does. Everyone goes quarterback, running back, blah, blah, blah. Let's go reverse. Let's start with special teams, a group that we've enjoyed some relative stability on in recent seasons that we should hopefully not be taking for granted. But there's also some opportunities here for competition at training camp coming up that's going to leave things like there's incumbents in place, but there's openings for new players to potentially take over. So we'll look at, first of all, the kick returning game, which feels perhaps the most wide open. We'll also look at the kicker position and the undrafted rookie free agent that's competing with Cairo Santos that has some big fans in the kicking world, that maybe there's the possibility for a real competition there that could be more than just a camp body at that spot. And we'll also look at some of the turnover that the Bears have had with their core special teams players and which guys on the depth chart will need to step up into those roles, not only to help the special teams, but also just to make their spot on the 53-man roster. Let's start with kick returner, though, because that one touches the ball the most and is a little bit more of the most exciting of the place, even though the kick returning job specifically at kickoffs will be a little different this year with some new rule changes the NFL put into place. We did a whole podcast looking at that rule change and how it will affect the Bears kickoff game and battle. You can go back and take a listen to that. I think it was a May 30th, like end of May-ish episode of the podcast. But specifically at training camp, it's going to be go time for who's going to be the go-to kickoff and punt returner. Now, it's an interesting spot because the Bears have brought back pretty much everybody that was involved in the return game, the actual return men from last season, with the exception of, like Ihmir Smith-Marsette had one return in one game, but was cut early in last season. But, last season, your kickoff returning was Velus Jones, Treston Ebner, and Khalil Herbert were the main three guys that took the spots there. And then punt returning was mostly Dante Pettis with, as we know, Velus Jones had a few opportunities there and quite literally let it slip right through his hands. And so, all of those guys are back, and all those guys are in the competition again, and yet we're also left wondering, if anybody else will be able to come in and truly unseat one of them, or even among those guys, who's going to emerge as the guy, the one who's going to take each spot. I kind of get the impression at this point that Velus Jones seems like the only one who could realistically be doing both, right? That if he has a really strong training camp, he could be the kickoff return guy and the punt return guy and be more of a return specialist and not have as large of a role potentially on offense. I mean, he's only going to be, at best, the fourth wide receiver on offense anyway. So I think the ideal scenario is that he can take both return jobs and actually do them at a high level and give you something dynamic, explosive, some playmaking ability as a return man there. Because I think there's two aspects of this when it comes to the punt return game. That, as we saw last year, first and foremost, you need a guy who can catch the punt when it comes to him, and also then know when to fair catch it and when to return it. That is, at its core, the two most important things that they need their punt returner to be able to do. You would like your punt returner to also be dynamic, to be fast, to be explosive, to be a threat to take the punt back for a touchdown anytime he returns a punt. But like we saw last season, we might just be happy with the guy who can make the fair catch decision correctly and actually catch it and not muff it and fumble it when he does. And that's kind of the Dante Pettis, Velus Jones competition there, right? Pettis is the guy who isn't necessarily the full-on speedster, elusive, make everybody miss and run away for the end zone, but can he just consistently catch it, not muff it, and know when to properly fair catch it and when to try and return it for a few yards, knowing that the ceiling might be a little bit low there, as opposed to Velus Jones, who we have a little more confidence that when the ball is in his hands, he has a chance to make a couple guys miss, outrun some guys down the sideline, and take it to the house. We just couldn't consistently trust him to actually catch the punt and to fair catch it when he should and not fair catch it when he shouldn't. Not that Dante Pettis was perfect in that regard either, but those are sort of the two sides of the coin there, unless somebody else gets into that mix, whether it's an Eddie Jackson, who's always sort of hovering around the punt return competition, but hasn't really been that guy. You wonder if somebody like Darnell Mooney could be in that role, but he's recovering from an injury at this point. But maybe having DJ Moore and Chase Claypool in the offense could free up Mooney to have more time, more just wear on the tires to be able to do punt returning and then not be asked to also then come out and be the number one receiver. Is that a situation we could see there? Same thing on kickoff returns, right? Where we feel like Herbert can be that guy who could be a great kickoff return man. We've seen him take some long kicks back, but is he going to be your number one running back, or will he be kind of second fiddle to Dante Foreman? That could determine how much of a role he can have in the kick return game versus do you want him fresh on 1st and 10 to take that first handoff on every drive, as opposed to Velus Jones? Maybe is it an easier decision on kick returns? Well, now there's a fair catch decision on kick returns with the new rule change that might make that interesting. We know Treston Ebner has done some returning, but I don't think we were particularly overly impressed with him there, and there were some issues, but as a rookie, you could still get better there. And Travis Homer, the running back they signed from the Seattle Seahawks, has done some kickoff returning, so I think there's an opportunity for him to potentially be in that competition. And there's a few other guys that have been getting reps at OTAs. Tyler Scott, I think, was getting some punt return reps in there, and a few others, so it's an open spot for sure. And again, I think baseline, the hope is to get for sure just somebody that knows when to catch it, when to fair catch it, and can actually catch it. And then ideally, that player is also a threat to take it to the house every time, but you might not have a player who fully, perfectly satisfies both. But the hope is that Velus Jones, as a third-round pick, can at a very minimum be that guy, a guy who can catch it and not muff it, who can fair catch it and can potentially take it up to the house. Return job, not the only one that's up for grabs, not the only competition we're going to see on special teams at Bears training camp. I want to dive into this kicker competition and why maybe there's a little more here. Maybe it's got some legs, pun intended, for a real kicker competition and not just your run-of-the-mill undrafted rookie free agent that comes into training camp but really doesn't pose any real threat to the starter. I also want to look at some of the core special teams players that aren't the returners and kickers, but the actual tacklers, blockers, coverage guys as well, next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Thousands and I think millions of people are on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm guessing chances are you might be on LinkedIn as well. And if you're looking to hire, it's a great place to find great candidates because they've got simple tools like screening questions that make it really easy to focus on just the candidates you want with the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus the leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Cairo Santos has been a solid kicker for the Chicago Bears, particularly in terms of field goal percentage, right? The last 2 seasons he has provided some very welcome stability. Really, the last 3 seasons it's been now. Boy, those have gone by fast. Some very needed stability at that spot. Over 90% field goal accuracy this year. His first year is almost 94% field goal accuracy. And after all of the kicker carousel, Augusta silence stuff that we got sick of under Matt Nagy, I want to make sure we do properly appreciate some of the field goal stability of Cairo Santos. I mean, how many in a row didn't he set the franchise record for most consecutive kicks in a row and was or approaching it at the very least, but it was 20 plus kicks in a row he made field goals for this Bears team. And it was like, all right, we're not talking like Hall of Fame or anything, but it's like kicker settled. But then last season, you had the missed extra point problem where he missed what I believe it was 5 missed PATs. I know he missed 2 total field goals all year. Was, I think, 7th highest accuracy in the NFL on field goals, but had the lowest PAT accuracy. I think it was 5 missed last season among kickers. The Bears said he adjusted his pre-kick or his PAT approach, his routine, his process for kicking extra points. And the special teams coordinator Hightower has said like they're confident that it's solved. The problem is behind him and full speed ahead with Cairo Santos. To sort of back that up, his last missed PAT was in week 14 against the Eagles. He had missed them in back-to-back weeks against the Packers and Eagles, but then didn't miss any of the 3 PATs in the final 3 games of the season that he played. So, excuse me, that was week 15 against the Eagles, and then 16, 17, 18, he made all 3 of the PATs, but still kind of a small sample size. Like, we're pretty confident in Santos, and we like the stability there, but there's a slight question mark there. Just a little bit of doubt lingering in the back of your mind. And in comes undrafted rookie free agent kicker Andre Szymt out of Syracuse. Most of the time, an undrafted rookie free agent kicker comes in, and it's a nobody. It's just no disrespect to the kickers that have come through, but rarely do they come in here, with the exception of the Matt Nagy wild carousel, but how many years under Robbie Gould, right? They bring in some undrafted kicker. He's there to give them a second kicker to practice with during training camp, but then he never has any shot at making the 53-man roster. Andre Szymt might be a little more than that, and we're not trying to overhype him here, but he was one of the better kickers in college football during portions of his college career. His freshman year, he won the Lou Groza Award for best kicker in the nation. He was like almost a 90% field goal kicker that year, had some big ones from distance for Syracuse as a freshman of all times. I think a redshirt freshman, but still a freshman to come in and have that great season. But the thing was, from there, his accuracy dropped off a bit from year to year and declined and never matched that freshman year, high quality. And this past season, I think his redshirt senior year, he hit 77% of his field goals. And that's not the kind of accuracy numbers you're looking for coming into the NFL. He is a very strong-legged kicker. That's what he's known for, is having more of the power than the pinpoint accuracy. He's had some pretty good success from deep, but has missed some deep kicks as well. But that's not always a perfect measurement there. But he's got a stronger leg perhaps than Cairo Santos. Santos is accurate, but not necessarily the biggest booming leg in the world. So you just wonder if the kicker can come into Chicago, if he can find even more of that consistency that he had and has shown before in his college career and really kick well. I mean, is there a path for him if Santos still has struggles at all on PATs? As we see in the preseason, if there's any kind of vulnerability there, could this be the year for somebody like Szymt to come in and unseat him? I'm thinking no, right? I'm not predicting that it's going to happen, but to me, the doubt, just the sliver of doubt with Santos plus some of the interesting history background with Andre Szymt combines for maybe we got a real kicker option here. And certainly if there's an injury down the line, you want to see if Szymt can be a guy who could come in. It's interesting for him too. He's from the Chicago area. I don't remember which suburb, but around there, local kid. The Bears were the only team that brought him in for a pre-draft workout, so there was clearly interest in him leading up to the draft. And he also was a guy who didn't start as a football kicker until his senior year of high school. Played soccer all throughout, and then senior year switched over and started kicking for his football team, walked on at Syracuse, and was the freshman kicker of the year. He's still relatively young and early in his kicking career, so you can understand why there might be a little more ups and downs throughout college, and that he hasn't peaked yet, that he still can become a better and better kicker and refine his craft even more in the NFL. So just somebody to keep an eye on. Not that it's a true like hot seat for Cairo Santos necessarily, but if he stumbles, and then Szmyt's there. He's not just some guy. There's a little more legs to this one. I'm going to try not to make that joke a third time than your average kicking camp leg. There's also perhaps one of the most interesting parts of training camp for me is how the 53-man roster shakes out with the rest of the backups fighting for special teams jobs. That as much as we're trying to figure out, like, okay, which of the backup wide receivers are the best on offense and which of the backup linebackers are the best on defense, it'll also matter which of those backups are contributing the most on special teams. And the Bears have some pretty important special teams snaps to replace. So we'll look at what's missing and who the best candidates are to replace them next on Locked On Bears. I still haven't heard a good or really any explanation as to why DeAndre Houston Carson is not a member of the Chicago Bears. He is currently a free agent. He has not signed with any teams. I don't remember him suffering an injury last season. I think he played in all 17 games. He started a handful of them when there were injuries at safety. He's only just turned 30 years old. He's not old. He's not expensive. He's a really, really good special teams player and filled in pretty well defensively. Like, it's not even, to me, I'm surprised he's not a Chicago Bear right now, but I'm more surprised that he's not on any team, that no team was like, hey, let's go get that really good special teams player. One of the only explanations I could possibly think of is like maybe he sort of has a handshake thing where it's like, I don't want to sign until training camp so I can skip OTAs and minicamp because I'm a veteran who doesn't need those. Like some of the other free agents like Jadeveon Clowney and other guys who are just kind of still sitting out there waiting until training camp to sign with the team. Like that's kind of the one thing I can come up with for DeAndre Houston Carson, because he was the Bears' leader in special team snaps and in tackles, and he's just been a go-to special teams guy every year. But even last year and the first year under Eberflus and company. So that to me has been a little bit of a strange one. I think actually Josh Blackwell might have had more special teams tackles than Houston Carson this year, but Carson is the leader, or was one of the leaders of that special teams group, and he's gone. And number 2 in special teams snaps last season, and another guy who made some key special teams tackles, linebacker Joe Thomas, also no longer in the mix. Between them, it's almost 600 special team snaps that will need to be replaced with guys currently on the roster, some guys that were here last season and some guys that weren't. I think, like when you look at the rest of the special teams in terms of like most special team snaps last season, DeAndre Houston Carson, Joe Thomas, they're gone. And then it's Josh Blackwell, the cornerback, Sterling Weatherford, the linebacker, Kari Blasingame, the fullback, Elijah Hicks, the safety, and then Matthew Adams, the linebacker. Those are all the 200 club of 200 special team snaps for this team on kickoff return blocking, kickoff coverage trying to tackle, punt return team trying to block, and punt coverage trying to tackle, and even some field goal block team as well for some of those guys. To me, with DeAndre Houston Carson gone, assuming he doesn't sign before training camp on the training camp veteran theory, certainly Elijah Hicks can step up into more of those DeAndre Houston Carson roles, especially because Hicks was already 6th in special team snaps last season. And, as a rookie 7th round pick, came in and had quite a few tackles and was involved in, a lot of different special teams moments and can grow into a bigger role in that area of the game. There's also the current rookie 7th round pick from this year's draft class, Kendall Williamson, who seems to be tailor-made for some special teams opportunities. Rookie 7th round pick's not going to come in and fill all of DeAndre Houston Carson's shoes, and perhaps Hicks won't do all of DeAndre Houston Carson's shoes either, but collectively that position group can start to fill some of his hole. And then with Joe Thomas gone and with Matthew Adams gone, you're going to need your linebackers, your backup linebackers, to step up into some special teams opportunities. And they've got 3 guys as backups right now that are all solid, at least solid build for special teams. Sterling Weatherford, who we just talked about, was on special teams last year. Dylan Cole comes over from the Tennessee Titans at linebacker, who was a good special teams player for them, should really easily fill that Joe Thomas, 4th linebacker / special teams ace linebacker role. And then Noah Sewell as well, him being more of a 2-down linebacker mold coming out of college. That really bodes well for special teams, right? Like being able to just attack downhill. He's not dropping back into coverage, doesn't have to move backwards or read a quarterback. You're just coming downhill, seeing ball, getting after ball. I think there's some real opportunity for him to carve out a pretty key special teams role, and also just probably more Sterling Weatherford snaps, probably more Jack Sanborn snaps on special teams. Those guys can really fill some of those roles. And then one of the other special teamers that we haven't talked about yet and that kind of gets overlooked a little bit in this is tight end Ryan Griffin. Really didn't do much at all on offense last season, but was a big part of the field goal team and as well as the kick return team as a blocker, and then the punt coverage team as well as one of the blockers, like for the punter. He wasn't the personal punt protector, but one of those guys that's helping, keep punt blockers from people from blocking the Bears punt. I would assume somebody like Robert Tonyan should be able to plug into that spot easily. He's going to play perhaps a bigger role on offense than Ryan Griffin did last season, so maybe then you don't want to ask him to do as much on special teams if you're going to be having him do that much on offense, because like in Green Bay, for example, this past season, Robert Tonyan did not do much special teams. He did earlier in his career when he didn't have as prominent of a role in the offense, but he's not necessarily the true blocking tight end type guy. He's more of the receiver type. So I don't know how much they're going to ask of him to fill that Ryan Griffin role, or if Jake Tongas, the young guy, the undrafted free agent from last year, can he grow into a bigger special teams role as the new number 3 tight end on this depth chart? Somebody's going to have to fill some of those key special teams spots there. They also have the undrafted rookie who's like a hybrid tight end fullback, Robert Burns, who could maybe do some of that stuff. Certainly, I think we'll see more special team snaps from running backs. We didn't see a ton last season from, certainly Herbert was only doing return stuff. Ebner wasn't doing a ton of non-return stuff. There was a little bit here and there, but it wasn't a major role in that spot. But a guy like Travis Homer is a multi-phase special teams player. And then you also have Roschon Johnson can do some special teams as well. I think that's going to be a spot where they're able to make up some extra special team snaps as well. So I'm not concerned that the Bears won't be able to pretty well replace the likes of DeAndre Houston-Carson and Joe Thomas, but it will be interesting to see how those end up ultimately shaping 53-man roster spots. Do you keep Travis Homer as the 4th running back because he can do some better special teams versus 7 wide receivers, like a Dante Pettis, Equanimous St. Brown question. Do you keep them or do you keep Travis Homer? Do you keep that 9th or 10th offensive lineman who doesn't play special teams, or do you keep a 4th tight end or, another sort of hybrid player, or a 5th safety or a 7th cornerback? All of a sudden the competition doesn't just become, okay, who's ahead of me on my positional depth chart, but also how much special teams opportunity is that player getting and what kind of role can they fill on that all important third phase. Special teams isn't sexy. We certainly successfully didn't talk about long snapper at all. There's no backup long snapper on the team. There is a backup punter as well, Ryan Anderson, although I feel like he's a bit more of the camp leg. He's not an undrafted rookie. He's been around some training camps before and hasn't been able to really consistently carve out an NFL role for himself. And I feel like Trenton Gill, he's fine. He did fine as a rookie. I don't think we're thrilled, best punter in the NFL, Pro Bowl caliber type guy, but he got the job done, right? He didn't make any big, terrible mistakes and put some decent punts inside the 20. That's about all you can ask for a rookie punter coming in. I think full steam ahead with a guy like Trenton Gill. So that's the Bears special teams. I love finding opportunities to talk special teams on the podcast. Those guys don't get enough love, and I always try and bring up special teams when we can here, because it is an important part of the game, and we really talked about that a lot on the Talking About the Rule Changes podcast back on May 30th. Go take a listen to that one for even more special teams in your ears. To do it, you got to make sure you're subscribed on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That way you can go back and find those past episodes and also keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. We're not quite daily just yet, about halfway through July here, mid to late July, I think around the week of the 17th or so. We'll start picking back up to a full 5 days a week podcast as we're getting you all ready for training camp with our first training camp preview today. Starting with the special teams, we're going to work our way through the roster backwards to end with quarterback instead of starting with quarterback like everybody else does. So we're doing a little bit differently here. That's why you got to keep coming back to get your training camp previews all in order. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.